Hello third years, hope you're all safe and well. Sorry I am not able to be in today. We're going to have a slightly different digital lesson today. We're going to carry on from where we left off last week though, and we're going to be looking at the next section of this unit, which is inheritance. Now before we get started, we are going to have a quick retrieval recap. So you'll have seen this format before. What we're looking for you to do is try and achieve 10 points by answering the appropriate questions. So yellow questions are worth 1 point, blue questions are worth 2 points, and red questions are worth 3 points. So at this point, you want to pause the video, let's give you 10 minutes to try and answer enough questions to get you to 10 points. These can just be done anywhere in your jotter. You could do them right at the back of your jotter if you want to keep them out of the way of your notes, or on blank paper if you need it. So you can get started with that, and you can start the video again when you're ready to hear some answers. So if you're ready to look at some answers, we'll have a quick look at the yellow questions first of all. So first of all, looking at this one here, the 2 types of reproduction. This was from last lesson. You should be able to have stated that that is sexual or asexual reproduction. The next one, which type of reproduction leads to more variation? That is of course sexual reproduction, as that involves the genetics of 2 parents combining. And our next yellow question was, which type of reproduction is fastest? That would be asexual reproduction, as we do not need to find a mate. So if you got any of those ones, you can correct those ones on your own. Next, moving on to our blue questions. So naming one type of variation and giving some examples. So again, this is from our last lesson, and you could have had continuous or discrete variation, and that ties in with this question down here. So if you'd said continuous variation, you could have had any example which is measured on a scale, such as height, weight, length of leaves, length of wingspan, anything that was measured on a scale. The other type is discrete variation, and that's measured in individual groups. So you could have had blood groups, hair colour, eye colour, whether or not you can roll your tongue. They would all be good examples of discrete variation. Our last blue question was one from last unit. So what is nitrogen needed for by plants and animals? It is of course needed to make proteins. So go ahead and correct those if you need to. And we'll have a wee look at the red questions. So again, fairly simple ones actually, but all from way back in last unit. So this one up here, naming 3 abiotic factors. So remember, an abiotic factor is a non-living factor. So you could have had temperature, pH, rainfall, light intensity, anything along those lines. What does the arrow show in a food chain? And the arrow shows the direction of energy transfer going from organism to organism. And lastly, what is meant by a biome? Well, that's a region of the earth which is characterised by having similar plants and animals and similar environmental factors. So go ahead and correct any of those that you need to, and then we will move on. So in the last lesson we looked at variation specifically, and we looked at the different types of variation, and in this one we are going to be looking at inheritance and how that actual variation is passed on. We're then going to move on in the next lesson to look at more specifically at genes and DNA and chromosomes and how they're all made up and how they are involved in passing on this inheritance of variation. So what we're looking for you to be able to do today is understand how variation is inherited. By the end of the lesson, you should be able to describe some of the causes of variation, describe the molecules involved in passing on variation, and state where DNA is located inside the cell, and describe why it is needed. So I'm going to start you off by having a wee look at a couple of photos on the next few slides, and you need to try and see if you can figure out who the parent is. So having a look at this ladybird up here, which one of the 3 individuals underneath do you think the parent might be? Do we think it's the red ladybird, the yellow ladybird, or the green ladybird? For all of you who are guessing the yellow ladybird, you'd probably be correct. We're looking at the shared characteristic here of the fact that the parent and the child ladybird share a similar number of spots, so they're likely to be more related than the others. Similarly on this one, which one of these horses do we think is belonging to this one here. Which two are we relating? Is it the red one, the yellow one, or the green one? In this case, it'd be most likely to be the red one. We've got very similar shared characteristics around the type of hair they've got around their legs, etc. In our next example, we're looking at this dog. So which dog down here do we think is the parent dog? Is it the red one, the yellow one, or the green one? Fairly straightforward this time. It should be the red one, of course. We've got much more similar characteristics than we do to the other two dogs. And your last one, looking at the rabbits. Which rabbit do we think is the parent of this bunny? Is it the red one, the yellow one, or the green one? Is of course the green one. Again, we've got a much more similar characteristic. Little bit different though, because we've not inherited the same ear shape. So we're seeing a similar characteristic, but it could, of course, if we were to look at this one, you could actually possibly say that perhaps it's this one. We've got a similar shape of face and we've got similar ears, we've just got a different colour of coat. So that one is a bit trickier. I'd suggest it's this one. However, we don't necessarily know by looking directly, as not all characteristics are directly inherited. Now, considering how these characteristics get passed on, so we talked about this a little bit last lesson where we were talking about sexual reproduction. So what we're mainly considering is the genetic information that's contained within an egg. In this case, it's 23 chromosomes in humans. And the genetic information that's contained within the sperm. In this case, it's still 23 chromosomes. Now, when they combine together and fertilise to form a zygote, that gives us a grand total of 46 chromosomes, and that contains the genetic information needed to form the embryo and needed for that individual to develop and grow up into our fully grown individual. And this individual here is going to show some variation and some similarities to either parent, because they've received half of that information that each parent's body cells contain. They've received 23 of the chromosomes in the egg, 23 of the chromosomes in the sperm, and that's led us to our fully blown embryo. Now, the actual molecules involved, and I've touched on a couple of these terms already. If we consider within a cell, and this could also count for the sperm and the egg cells, but in any cell, within the cell itself, we have the nucleus. And previously till now, we have often referred to the nucleus as being the control centre of the cell. It controls what's going on. And the reason we describe it as that is because within the nucleus, we have the chromosomes. And these chromosomes are long thread-like structures, which in themselves are made up of DNA. And it's the DNA that codes for the different characteristics and gives us that variation among our species. So the DNA itself is this long molecule inside the nucleus of the cells. So each human cell contains over 2 meters of DNA. In order for that to be fitted in, it needs to be folded up into these structures called chromosomes. Now, if you were to look at chromosomes under the microscope, you would see them looking something like this one. And there are 23 pairs of chromosomes in human cells. So we have 2 copies of chromosome number 1, 2 copies of chromosome number 2, 2 copies from chromosome number 3, and so on. And the reason we have each copy is because when sperm and egg cells are being produced, each sperm cell and each egg cell receives 1 chromosome number 1, 1 chromosome number 2. So when you look at the new formed embryo, that embryo has a chromosome number 1 that has come from the egg cell and a chromosome number 1 that has come from the sperm cell. And that's what allows us to have that variation between our different individuals. We look at the chromosomes individually, we can see on those chromosomes that we have individual sections of the DNA on one chromosome, and that's referred to as a gene. So if you were to unwind your chromosome out into the format of DNA, you would see one section of it, and that's referred to as a gene. The reason that one section is referred to as a gene is because it contains the instructions to make one protein. So that one gene might make the protein, for example, melanin, and that protein is one of the things that can give you brown hair or brown eyes. So if you have that gene inherited from one of your parents, that's what's going to give you the characteristic of having brown hair or brown eyes, for example. So that's given you a few new vocabulary terms to think about. And so what I would like you to do now is open up your booklets to the next page that you're on, so just after the stuff that we did on variation last week. And you should see a table very similar to this one. I think it's around page 4 or 5 of your booklet. What I'd like you to do now is try and come up with your best definition for these terms: gene, DNA, chromosome and zygote. If you want, you can do it in rough work in your jotter and copy out the proper definition in a second, but I want you to have a go at thinking quite hard about what do you think those terms mean based on what we've just been discussing. So if you're ready to have a wee consideration of the answers, you should have that a gene is a small section of DNA which contains the instructions for making a protein. That DNA is the long molecule in the nucleus of cells which carries the genetic information. That chromosomes are a structure made up of folded DNA, and that the zygote is a fertilised egg containing the genetic information from both sperm and egg. And remember last week we mentioned that these are referred to as gametes. So compare your answers to what's on the board just now. Correct anything if you need to correct it. Make sure you're happy with the definitions. These are going to be quite important as we carry on through this section. Now, just to recap some of this, I would like you guys to have the chance to watch this video, and it will cover a little bit more on what DNA is and exactly how it codes for protein. So I'm going to stop here and let you guys get on and watch this particular video, and then you can carry on and do the last section of your notes, which is this section here. You have got a copy and complete little section. I've left the answers available to your teacher today, so you should be able to watch the video, and then I would like you to carry on and try and fill in these gaps in the section of notes you have in your booklet. So you're going to watch the video and then you're going to answer these, and then there should be some further questions for you to do after that. Thanks very much for third year. I'm sure you're working very hard, and I look forward to seeing you again in the next few days.